quarter, marking a 1,500 basis point year-over-year increase as the strengthening freight market provides a tailwind for the broker. Meanwhile, Forward Air is showing real signs of recovery following what analysts are calling a messy merger. The logistics company reported its best quarterly performance since combining with freight forwarder Omni Logistics back in January 2024, with consolidated revenue of $673 million, up 9% year over year, and consolidated adjusted EBITDA climbing 18% to $93 million. The expedited freight segment led the charge with $319 million in revenue, a solid 24% year-over-year increase as tonnage climbed 7% and shipments rose 2%. The company is benefiting from some less-than-truckload freight that had previously been lost to a depressed truckload market now returning, pushing shipment weights and revenue per shipment higher. Forward also announced last month it entered a non-binding agreement with a contract logistics customer to save half and potentially up to 75% of a $250 million annual contract. Finally, the heavy-duty truck market is cooling off, but don't mistake that for weakening demand. North American Class 8 net orders totaled 22,000 units in July, according to FTR Transportation Intelligence, down 31% from June, but still a massive 75% higher than July 2025. Industry analysts are clear that the slowdown reflects limited production availability rather than softening freight demand, with replacement demand, firmer freight rates, and improving fleet utilization continuing to support the market. ACT Research analyst Carter Vieth notes that calendar year 2026 production is essentially sold out, and the sizable month-over-month decline doesn't reflect a sudden drop in demand, but indicates a lack of 2026 build slots available as orders run up against full Class 8 backlogs. Through July, 2026 Class 8 net orders are running 120% higher than the same period last year.
All right, so really, honestly, all of those really pointing to positive signs in the freight market and the continued trajectory of.
Yeah, I like the Class 8 order data there because it also explains a nuance there that ramping production is not something that a lot of these, obviously the OEMs can't just say, okay, we're here, we're ready to build 10,000 units overnight. Like we've had a slow market. I mean, last year was abysmal for the OEM. So to be able to ramp up production and have those slots available is just not realistic. But also we're in the off season for orders. Like, I mean, I used to be a financial analyst for an asset-based carrier, and you build your budgets, in the few months leading to the end of the year and making your budget for next year, knowing you're not going to get delivery for another 9 to 12 months. So we're a little early to get too in the weeds with the Class 8 orders, but I think that's definitely one of the more interesting ones. And of course, RXO is.
Well, yeah, I think we can't not talk about RXO. Yeah. We'll definitely talk about it more in detail tomorrow. And then we actually have Drew Wilkerson on next week, so I'm sure we'll get to ask him about it. But I think overall, positive, right?
Overall positive, but I think there's an interesting nuance here in the way that they call out the broker liability.
They didn't specifically call it out in the earnings,
but they kind of infer.
But they did, talking about carrier vetting. Yeah. I thought that was one of the most interesting parts of it as well. I also thought that the spot contract mix, that they're leaning heavier and heavier into spot, right? I mean, obviously compressed margin for brokers always, but going from, what did they say, 20 up to, from 33% to 42% spot mix. So enabling them to really kind of ride this wave of
That's what you have to do as an asset light.
To continue improving revenue.
I mean, when you're asset light, you jump into the spot market to cover up the fact that you're getting crushed on the managed trans side because your margins are getting compressed because those carriers are turning down old pricing agreements from November of 2025 when the market was no longer, when it was relatively soft and oversupplied. Crazy how quick it turns on you. But I think the margin compression that I saw in the report was interesting. I think that's very normal though. Like I'm not over.
We haven't seen anything that hasn't had margin compression
every broker
when it comes
that
to brokerage.
Seen, has had a margin compression issue. I think the question for me moving forward with these earnings on these brokerages is how does the broker liability continue to kind of play a role? Because normally we see these large brokers, margins will compress on the front edge of every market flip when it goes tighter. But then it expands again. And that's the thing I'm going to be watching in Q3 for some of these guys is, are they able to start to expand their margins even though carrier vetting has to get more stringent.
Yeah, and I think it felt like to me that their earnings had a more positive trajectory and a more positive outlook versus a lot of them have been a little bit really hesitant to say what they think is going to happen next quarter and not wanting to overpromise. So I did enjoy that part of it. But then, all right, we got to talk about Forward Air, and particularly the standout part of theirs was their LTL segment, right? Their expedited freight with revenue up 24%, tonnage up 7%, operating margin 10.9%. So their expenses improved. I think overall it's telling a story of improvement as well.
Yeah, and Forward Air, I mean, I used to have a piece, I used to work with a piece of that business that is now at Forward Air. It used to be at my old company, but it is, the expedited portion of it does interest me quite a bit because you've got this Covenant earnings. They have what they would consider expedited, but it's long haul across the country.
Different, right.
Very different expedited.
Team, it's team.
Yes.
Versus this is true expedite, yeah.
Exactly. And that was fairly stagnant to down. Actually, it was a drag on Covenant earnings in this quarter, but these guys had a totally different experience. And I think that's interesting because they have it's a shorter expedited move for them in most cases. And I think the rails have really taken that long haul segment, as we've noted, have really taken that transcontinental movement away from the trucking market in a pretty good chunk here lately. But Forward Air has that last mile type move that really the rails do not have fungibility with, and we see this in our short haul data as well. The CSTVI, for instance, I mean it's still taking off.
CSTVI stands for
City Sonar Truckload Volume Index, which is measuring loads that are less than 100 miles in length.
Yep.
So that local haul freight is still getting a ton of pressure. And it's going to be, I think, a concern moving forward is how is that market going to hold up?
I agree.
Later in the year when the sense of urgency really hits.
Yeah, I mean, because we're seeing the same thing on drayage, right? That short length of haul that everyone is saying we could do more if we had more drayage capacity because intermodal volumes have picked up so much.
Right.
So we'll see what that happens as the driver market is so tight.
Exactly. So, I mean, Forward Air, I mean, they've got a good model. I don't know their merger acquisition aspect. I know that was a little bit of a contentious,
messy. They call it messy.
A little messy merger, but maybe they'll get through that.
All right. Well, with that, we would like to bring in our first guest, Mike Ritzema, president and founder of Superior Trucking Payroll Services. And I want to talk about this driver pay index and how you guys get to that number and what you're seeing. So can you give us a little bit of an overview of what the index is and how it is created?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. The driver pay index is really a function of how much the driver is grossing, including their per diem, from an average paycheck. And so what we do is, because we have clients all over the country, we just amalgamate, we take it all, put it together, aggregate it all and say this many checks were written to drivers. This was their gross pay plus their per diem. We divide it out and we set an index. We went back to January of 2020 because I wanted to have it before COVID and set that at 100. So that was just a baseline. And then we go up and down from there as driver pay goes up and down. And so now we've gotten to a point where with the trucking recovery, what I had seen in the past, and we can get into this more if you like, but the driver pay seems to be about 5 or 6 months behind where the load revenue starts going up. For example, when you guys reported late last fall that, November, hey, things are starting to look up. We started seeing that in pay, later after that.
So Mike, the index is sitting right around 170. Can you give us a little bit of context of the jump that we've seen over the last 6-7 months in this index and how that progressed? You alluded to the fact that it runs about 5 months late, and I'm assuming that means that here recently we saw a pretty big jump, right?
Yeah, June is a little bit of an anomaly.
Okay.
I have the July number, and I took copious notes so I could share them with you, and I took so many notes that I can't find my number. But it's around 160 for July, where 170 was the peak number, the highest we've ever seen for June. And I think that June was a one-off. I think I'd love to be able to tell you with absolute certainty this is why June was so high. But I think part of this index is it just has us start asking the questions. Part of it is there's no holidays in June, which helps. Part of it is that I think drivers might just be working harder. because it's not, this index is not designed to give you a rate per mile index. What the drivers are getting is, are they getting raises or not?
Right.
It's about how much they're actually grossing.
Yeah, and that would make sense. As utility has improved, as we've seen in so many earnings, that drivers are getting more miles, more pay, more optionality in the freight that they're taking at higher rates as well. Can you talk a little bit about how it's based on true payroll data and how you guys get to this clean number?
Yeah, thanks for asking. What we do is we go through all this data that we have and we pull out everybody who's not a driver. And so there are other indexes out there regarding pay, even just within trucking. But my understanding is that they will include everyone. They'll include the owner, they'll include the shop, they'll include the office. And so we just do the company drivers, the drivers that are either W-2 or really should be W-2. We don't count the owner operators. We don't count the billing people. We don't count HR. We don't count safety. We don't count, the shop. And so because we know how their departments work, we go through and just pull the data that's actually drivers. And so that I feel like our reading then is more bearing on how the driver is doing versus trucking people in general.
So talk a little bit more about that, and if the index really moves in a trajectory or in tandem with the trucking profitability, as it seems to go up as spot rates go up, maybe that is a function of, like I mentioned, utilization and more optionality in freight. But what does that mean, since you brought it up, when it comes to like actual margin of trucking companies versus driver pay, and if they're correlated or not?
I would love to have the margin index for everybody. I don't have that, but I did get some information from Professor Miller over at Michigan State last year about the average rate per miles that the trucks were getting. And that's why I noticed that correlation between the 5-month lag between when rates change for the trucking company and when they change for the driver. Because as we went into this horrible, horrible slump about 4 years ago, a little more than that, the driver rates didn't go down right away. They stayed where they were until the fall of 2022, right? Like, yeah, great. That's a perfect graphic right there. You can kind of see where it kind of had an artificial peak at January 2023, but we all know that freight rates went in the tank much before that. So it seems to be a lagging thing. And as we've been seeing lately, rates to the truck have been better and stronger. And you guys talk about the tender rejections all the time, which is another piece of evidence of that, and a significant one. And so driver pay is lagging behind that. And I think part of that is that the trucking companies are responding to, hey, we're getting better rates. Now we really want to find more drivers. Or when it was going down, and as much as I don't like to talk about trucking rates going down, but when it was going down, I think it was, we'll hold on as long as we can, and then they just couldn't do it anymore, or their most expensive drivers were leaving.
Yeah, it would seem to me, and Zach, I'd love your take on it, that the correlation would be more, the rates are in indirect correlation, right? That it's really as capacity tightens that it's harder to hire and retain drivers. They have more options. So then so rate is really more a function of capacity tightening. And this driver wage is more a function of that, because as capacity tightens, it's harder to keep drivers in their seats. It's harder to recruit new drivers. And then in the current environment, there's more barriers to entry for drivers, more regulation around that as well.
It's a fascinating thing, because I think you're measuring two things in aggregate that are coming together here. One is the activity has increased significantly for these guys. So you're capturing this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but it would look like that as the activity increases, you capture that. And then on top of that, if they do get a wage increase, you also get a little bit of a boost, because trucking companies, like you said, they tend to wait until they make sure this is real, and then they start having retention issues, and wage becomes more of a factor here. So do you think that this last jump, it went up to 170 in June, it came down a little bit in July. Do you think we saw a little bit of that? I think June was a pretty robust month, but it sounds like to me that, based on our tender data, we know it was a very strong volume month for trucking, but it looks like there is probably, I would take away from this index that there was some wage increase activity also going on simultaneously here.
I think that you're right. I think that some of the things that happen are that drivers that get hired by these companies that have increasing volumes and things like that are willing to pay more for new drivers than they were paying before. And I think that affects it. I can't tell you that this data absolutely tells you that,
For sure.
We don't get data from all of our clients about how many miles the people drove or what their rate per mile is. And not all of them pay per mile anyway. Some pay percentage or things like that. So I agree with your premise. I can't swear to you that the data confirms it, but it certainly correlates with it. I agree with you completely. And I think one of the things too about the trucking, the drivers getting paid more and it's been going up all year, is that exactly the owners and the managers of the trucking companies now have a little more breathing room to pay them more again than they did last year and the year before and the year before that. And I think that's part of why wages are going up as well.
I would also wonder if freight mix in the index has something to do with it. As the market freight mix, we'll see changes likely. We're thinking that more freight is likely going to go into dedicated scenarios over the next year to 18 months to create, first of all, more consistency for shippers, but also with carrier vetting being such an issue and being able to have that dedicated capacity and with dedicated rates being cheaper than spot now versus it was the opposite for so long. And dedicated drivers tend to make better wages or have weekly minimums and all those sorts of things. I wonder if that plays a role into it as well.
I would think so in this situation. But it also, I think more than that, the fact that you're capturing this big jump, I think is the most telling thing, even though you can kind of call it an anomalous move. It's fascinating to me from the dynamic. I anecdotally hear all the time that recruiting drivers right now is insanely challenging, like one of the more challenging markets that many people have seen. So this would make sense that we saw this big push, especially as demand has ramped up so significantly that this index jumps. Is there any other takeaways or anything that you've kind of gleaned from this index that you think people should know about?
Well, I think one of the things that I like about it is it just gives you an indication. I mean, we started this whole thing because I would have clients or other people in trucking just call me and they realized that we did payroll for trucking companies. And they'd ask, well, how are the drivers getting paid? Is it going up? Is it going down? And I was talking to Tim over at Ascend TMS about that. And he's like, you got to get that. You've got that data. You got to get that out there. And so, but what I'm seeing is I think that the fun part is kind of where's it going to go the rest of this year?
Right.
And I think the rest of this year, it's that it may not spike like it did in June. I do think June again was a one-off, and you guys, I'm sure, see that in your data all the time, where there's just crazy sometimes things that happen. But I think it's going to keep going up. I think the rest of the year, it's going to keep going up. If I had to put a number on it, I wouldn't fall over in shock if it was 180 at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to go up as the year progresses as well.
I would assume that Christmas is probably going to have pretty elevated. Well,
if we have a true peak season and people pay stay out bonuses and stuff, then we could see that.
Because that wouldn't be a true wage increase moment. Activity actually doesn't necessarily go up around Christmas in total. It's more of a sense of urgency combined with a lack of availability that pushes
Right, and if there's more freight available, there's an incentive to stay out and run more miles and to go home less often and for those paychecks to increase. So you also track turnover. So I would love to get your insights on that and what you're seeing in turnover so far this year and maybe what you're expecting for the rest of the year.
Yeah, thanks. We just started tracking turnover. It kind of became we have this data, let's share it. And the turnover did go up in June, and I don't know that there's a correlation there, but it's gone back down in July. And so we just try to see trends of, I feel like when the turnover is high, that should correlate to big events as far as rates go, going up or going down. Drivers are leaving because they found someone that pays them more or their current company can't keep paying them what they were paying them. So we're still working on really dialing in what that means, because that's a pretty new index for us. But I think that there's value there as far as for trucking companies to compare with how they're experiencing turnover versus what we're seeing. Because if your turnover is consistently higher than what we report, then maybe you want to look in the mirror a little bit. I don't want to be mean about it, but discover why your turnover is higher. And if it's lower, you can feel pretty good about how you're doing compared to the rest of the industry. But I like that we're able to put out kind of a benchmark for this is what we're seeing, and other companies can use that to compare their own private data to what we're seeing and see if they're better or worse than average versus an actual number versus just their feeling of how they're doing.
Yeah, I love that. What was the number for June? The turnover number?
It was high. It was like 14. It was like a lot of drivers had gone up a lot. It was usually around 10, and between 9 and 10, and it was up around 14. And the way we measure it is because clients don't always send us when they terminate people. That they've got a million other things to do, like hiring that next driver, managing loads and equipment, right? All these things. And so what we do is if they got paid in May and they didn't get paid in June, we count that as a turnover. Now, I will acknowledge that it's not going to be perfect, but it is what it is. And so that's how we use it. And there were a lot more people that happened to in June. And one of my theories was that new drivers for companies, because the turnover was higher in June, were starting at higher rates. We don't see a lot of sign-on bonuses paid in bulk on day of hire. So that's not going to impact the index. We usually see it paid over time and just in their check a couple $100 a month or something like that for the companies that pay sign-on bonuses. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I thought I would love to dig into this more, would be, were people just starting them at higher rates than they were before? And that's why the index moved up.
I mean, this is, I think the turnover index is probably one of the most necessary in the industry that I've read about. You said it was around 14, and I'm curious if you could kind of give a little context around that, what that might actually mean. You said it averaged around 9 and 10. Is there a scale, or is it just a pure, like, as we see drivers not populated in the payrolls, it goes up and down? Is there a cap or a scale?
Well, the rough math is that if it's kind of percentage, really. Mm-hmm. And so it was almost like one driver in 7 got paid in May and not in June. Mm-hmm. for that same company. Okay. We have drivers that work for one of our clients and end up working for another one of our clients. That would count as a turnover. Gotcha. And so, just to be fair, I mean, obviously it moves a lot. And if you're at 8 every month, that's 96 a year, which is pretty consistent with what historically we've seen in trucking, that 100% turnover a year or neighborhood of that. That's why 14 was markedly high. Oh, and yeah. I haven't.
So that makes total sense.
Isn't that
so
crazy?
Basically a traditional turnover ratio on a monthly cadence. So that makes sense to me. Because I mean, traditionally it's around, I mean, like you said, 9 and 10 is like the industry standard in terms of turnover ratios, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what our data has shown us as well, is that, occasionally you have a month that's lower. Some months, it's just lower, and some months it's higher, and it works out over time. It's kind of like even with the spike that we had in the driver pay index in June, you kind of just build you smooth it all out. The same thing works with turnover, in that sometimes you're going to have high months, and July's was under 10. I'm happy to get you the number later. I'll post it on where this is broadcast.
That'll be great. So, Mike, for our viewers who are responsible for recruiting or hiring or paying drivers, what should they be watching in this data? How should they use it?
Well, I think they should use the driver pay. They should use as almost looking at their own starting rates. And if they haven't adjusted their starting rate this year, for example, they may want to look at that. The market's going up, and they should use that. Also, when it was going down, they should have used that too, because the drivers, by the way, can do the same thing. If a driver sees this, they should know, I should be getting paid more than I was maybe at the beginning of the year or a year ago. This July was 20% over last July, even though it dropped from June. So I think that it helps give them external validation for why they pay what they pay. Obviously, you can only pay what you can afford and things like that as well. For the turnover, I think it's looking at taking the last year, for example, and comparing it to your own last year. We have a podcast, Driven for Success, that I do every week, and we talk about driver turnover a lot because it's so important, and it's so hard. It's so expensive to replace them, and it's disruptive to your operation, especially if you're smaller. And, what are you doing to prevent turnover? That's really the big thing. Side note, the first thing you do to prevent turnover is not make bad hires, but there's a lot more than that. I'm sure you have other experts. I'd be happy to go into that.
Yeah, no, the bad hire segment, I think they're still trying to solve that across many industries. But I think this is super valuable information in the sense that when you are trying to evaluate what's causing turnover in my particular business, having 2 indices like this that tell you, hey, it's not just me, it's the world. Also, if everyone else is increasing or they're getting increased activity and we're staying flat, I think that's extremely valuable. So, I mean, I think this is 2 wonderful indices you have.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's very cool to be able to see. And I would almost approach it that way. All right, let's look at turnover and then let's look at pay, right? And see if there's a correlation and if they're changing in tandem or if they aren't, both within your own organization and then kind of as an industry.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Super cool addition with the turnover data too.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
That's good stuff.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think our viewers need to hear about what you think is going to happen the second half of this year with these numbers? Or how they can prepare themselves for what might happen for the second half of the year with these numbers?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing is just, when you find the right driver and you want to hire them, you might have to pay them a little more. And again, a lot of this, especially in June, was probably more miles basically that they were running. But just know that that's the cost of goods going on right now, and don't be surprised when they ask for a little more, and be willing to pay it, because you should hopefully be getting it on the revenue side. And again, I do think it's going to keep going up. I think you're going to see it, as you guys have with all that amazing data that you have. You see where things are going, and you see where things are happening right now in real time. And the trucking for the small to medium sized fleet, especially, trucking is just getting stronger as the spot rates keep going up and things like that. And the driver is going to want a piece of that, and you're going to want to add more drivers and possibly more trucks. I'm sure you guys have equipment price indices, as you were talking about the orders being done through the rest of the year. All that stuff, it's all going to go up. It all goes together. And so I would say just be aware of it. That's the first thing. And know that that's what you can't pay them, what you paid them a year ago or 2 years ago. And that's okay, because you're getting more money too. So we're all rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yeah. Mike, thank you so much. This is really good information. If our viewers want to go check out these indices, where's the best place for them to go to look for them?
Yeah, the best place is on our website, truckingpayroll.com/DPI, Driver Pay Index. I will make sure that the turnover index is right in there as well. So I'll get that going right away. But that's the easiest place to find this information. We're also all over socials at wherever you're looking at Trucking Payroll. So the LinkedIn, X, all those places.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been great. We are now going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with the Sonar Update.
The drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and crews who keep the world moving deserve tools that work as hard as they do. That's what Samsara builds, technology for safer, more efficient operations, made with the people who do the work. Samsara, built with operators for operators. Learn more at samsara.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business: the trends, the technology, industry and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts. 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head-to-head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
And welcome back. Let's dive into that sonar data.
Today's Sonar Update, Thursday, August 6th. I want to talk a little bit about big picture, what's happening domestically in the country regarding tender rejection, spot rates, contract, as we've continued to see tender rejections fall a bit. So STRI, which is Sonar Truckload Rejection Index, has fallen again down to 13.62%, which is down about 2.5% month over month. However, reefer and flatbed rejections really are remaining pretty strong. They're both near 20%. As would stand to reason, as rejections have fallen a bit, spot rates have also fallen. They're down to 347, which is down 6.72% month over month, and pretty normal for seasonality and kind of normaling out after we saw that huge spike in both spot rates and tender rejections earlier in this year. Contract rates are rising, which is also creating less of a need for tender rejections. They are up to 272 plus fuel. But when you look at that year over year, contract rates are up 19%. So we are seeing them rise after spot rates do, as is typical. One other point that I think is interesting is intermodal contract rates have remained really cost competitive. They're only up 1.28% year over year. So this is continuing to lead to opportunities for mode conversion and taking freight from trucks over to rail. And we're seeing that with the volume numbers as well. Our O-Rail index, which is loaded rail volumes, are up another 0.66% week over week. But when you really look at those loaded container volumes since early July, through now, it's up 17%. So we are seeing continued volume increases there. I wanted to dig a little bit more specifically into those STRI rejection numbers by region to give a better, viewpoint of exactly what's happening in the country. So I'm going to go in order from highest rejection percentages to lowest based on region of the country, starting with the Midwest at 15.99%. So based on what we've seen this year and what we've been talking about, this sort of industrial renaissance happening in the United States with more manufacturing, it would stand to reason that the Midwest still has the highest tender rejections. A little bit of that based on demand and also based on where capacity is exiting the market. This is different than prior cycles because usually we see strengthening on the coasts heading into this time of the year with imports, but with more manufacturing happening in the U.S., we're seeing that Midwest be the highest rejection, again at 15.99%. Then the Southwest at 15.18%, which also includes border crossings and freight coming in from Mexico, as it includes Texas. Then we're seeing the Southeast at 13.93%, but I think it is worth calling out that it is falling more quickly than other regions, the tender rejections out of the Southeast. Then the Northeast at 12.14%, followed by Mountain Prairie at 10.69%. And then the West Coast, even lower than that, at 9.72%. I dug into that a little bit more because obviously California and LA drive so much of the freight in that West Coast region. So California as a whole is at 9.88%, with Los Angeles being at 9.15%. So while we are seeing a lot of port activity, as we heard from Gene Soroka earlier this week on the show, as it moves into the Inland Empire, into warehouses, then we'll continue to see more freight come out of there and likely see rejections rise, but still remaining, certainly I would say, relatively manageable at 9.15%. Generally, we've heard from a lot of our customers that around that 8% tender rejection is where they get some leverage in the market. as a transportation provider. But again, compared to recent norms where tender rejections were so high earlier this year, down to 9.15% in Los Angeles. And then bringing up the end is the Northeast at 8.97% tender rejections. So I wanted to put this in context with volumes overall as well. And when we do look at volumes year to date from where they were in early January, which was pretty low, they are up 34% with accepted tender volumes up 30% year to date. That new ASTVI index that we released earlier this year. But when you put it in context of just the last 3 months where we've seen a bit of this cooling, they are down. Volume is down 4.6% in the last 3 months, with accepted tender volumes down 5.2%. So it really makes sense of what we're hearing in earnings across the board, particularly from carriers where they feel like we are in the early innings, said over and over again by so many of the CEOs on these calls, of this freight recovery and rebalancing, and are still really cautiously optimistic. So we'll continue to provide the data daily and watch, but we'll see as brake check week is towards the end of August, which will likely pull at least some capacity off the road short term. But we're continuing to also see stories come out regarding continued enforcement and regulation. We talked a little bit yesterday about Operation Highway Shield and that joint effort between Homeland Security, the DOT, FMCSA, to do a little bit of a crackdown and to do some inspections now, not just in Florida, but across the Midwest, continuing to take a little bit of additional capacity out of the market based on moving violations, ELP mandates, or CDL violations. So while that wasn't a massive amount of capacity that was taken out of the market, I think it stands to reason and backs up my thesis that regulation is going to continue to raise the barriers of entry. I don't see capacity continuing to enter the market. I think based on liability concerns, new carriers who have new MC numbers are going to have an incredibly hard time getting freight. And I think the regulation is going to continue, and we'll see from the federal and state level governments that they are going to be doing what they can to continue to monitor the freight market and ensure that regulation doesn't create a glut of overcapacity. We're also hearing from all of the carriers in their earnings that they are working on utilization and profitability right now and not looking to grow or expand their fleets. We've heard many of them speak of shrinking their fleets over the last year. So really, this is a capacity story still. We'll be continuing to track available capacity and then watching and waiting to see if there is a demand pickup. All right, Zach. So I'm going to ask you some questions since I did this and I want to know what your thoughts are, some of it. So we were talking about California being relatively, weak, even though we're hearing strong story of the Port of LA, right? So do you think intermodal is taking a significant amount of volume from there right now, or do you think this is just normal seasonality?
No, it's definitely intermodal is taking some level of additional volume away. I mean, you can see it in the intermodal, the loaded domestic container charts. Like, it doesn't seasonally move higher at the end of July. And that's what we're seeing is domestic container growth at the end of July. If you look at the very edge of this chart, like there's an uptick in domestic container volumes and it's coming down. And I think if you looked at the trend line, and I'm a data nerd, so looking at the trend line of STVI there, you can see that we're actually falling below April and spring volumes. This is weird. The question I ask next is this an economics issue? Are we seeing lower demand economically? And the answer is no. Based off the loaded container volumes, it looks like shippers, and I mean, if I'm a shipper, you have to consider like continuing to transition some of that volume to containers. But I think you were right in the way that you split California. I mean, anybody, you know this, and
well, you can't look at the West Coast, right? Like as a whole.
It's hard to do that. I mean, from a regional organizational perspective, but I mean, Northern California, almost one of the easier places in the country to get capacity. Southern California seasonally can be extremely challenging. And that north or the southbound freight coming out of, the Pacific Northwest and Sacramento, it's almost like no rejections whatsoever, even in a tight market. So it keeps your regional rejection rate artificially, it's not artificial, but it's lower than you would
Yeah.
traditionally expect.
I loved that. So Zach was listening to this live, right, as you all were, and when he heard me say the overall tender rejection rates for the West Coast, he's like, "Well, what is it in California?" And I was like, "Oh, well, listen, I did break it down to just California and then down to just LA." My first job out of college, I was a pricing analyst specifically for the West Coast.
Yeah.
And they were like, really, all you need to know is that all of the freight comes out of LA, and any carrier or any capacity that's on the West Coast needs to get to LA.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's true. So why do you think rails, so we saw, to your point, since early July, a 17% increase in loaded container volumes. Why are intermodal contract rates not rising more quickly than they are, right? 1.2% year over year.
You've got to dabble into a little theory, but there's also a structural impact here. Like, they don't get rate increases till October. Like, seasonally speaking, they don't traditionally start to raise rates. But I think there's also this added layer of this transcontinental merger that's keeping us a little bit, I think it's keeping rates a little lower than they would be. I think we would have seen some peak season surcharges announced. I think that's still in question as to what that means in terms of when peak season is and how much that might entail. But once the rails start to encounter some congestion around their railheads, I think we'll start to see that percolate later.
Yeah.
Right now, shippers, they're seeing a 32% savings rate. And if they're pulling freight in earlier than they anticipated, which we saw in our data, they did have a little bit of a pull forward in June. They got time to transload this stuff and let it move across the country and warehouse it before the final demand. So
and now's the time to do it so that you can get rail spots. If you wait until peak season, you're not going to be able to get spots on the train, and it will be at a peak season surcharge. You need to go ahead and set your benchmark now for how much freight you're shipping each week.
So I'm not taking too much away from this yet. Because it is July. But I think after Labor Day, we're going to see some things. And by the way, it's a call out. I wonder why the CAVSA wants to encourage drivers to take vacations. They keep having their inspection periods right next to major holidays.
I never thought about that, but it doesn't make any sense.
It's like, okay, give you a reason to get off the road.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and then we will be right back with Grip, Swan, and myself.
This segment is brought to you by Descartes. The best supply chains aren't just faster, they're more connected. That's why leading companies rely on Descartes' global logistics network to connect, collaborate, and move freight with greater visibility and confidence. Powered by innovation and AI, Descartes helps businesses deliver smarter, uniting the people and technology that move the world. Learn more at Descartes.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3. The Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days. Founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts. 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head-to-head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
All right, welcome back. We are going to welcome in our next guest from Grip, Juan, and talk a little bit about cold chain. So Juan, welcome to FreightWaves today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all.
Can you tell us a little bit about Grip, what you guys do, and then talk a little bit about, I guess, cold chain and fulfillment in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've put together this company a few years ago where we do fulfillment technology and logistics services for brands that go direct to consumer and are perishable. So we saw, a few years ago, consumer behavior change where people now know that they can buy a box of frozen or refrigerated products delivered to their doorstep, and that's what we do, all under the same roof. So we are delivering, a few $1 billion for the product on a yearly basis with 5 facilities across the country, and getting to 80% of the U.S. population in 24 hours and the rest in just 48. So a lot of technology, a lot of logistics, and a lot of operations and fulfillment on the ground as well.
So many parts of transportation in the supply chain, trucking, for example, is highly fragmented, but cold chain fulfillment is as well. Why do you think it has historically been so fragmented as an industry?
It's a relatively new industry when it comes to the direct-to-consumer segment. If you look at the non-perishable world, that started to happen 30 years ago, with Amazon and a bunch of other companies as well. And when you look at the direct-to-consumer perishable segment, like 10 years ago, it was not a thing. Like you had maybe 1, 2, or 3 brands trying to stand up as a company, but it was really not an industry worth, putting together with lots of technology and consolidation as well. So that is what has happened over the last, 4 or 5 years since we've been around, is that, the first class of companies that started, testing and putting together exciting products in the space already happened. And now what we're doing is essentially what happened to the non-perishable world a few years ago, where, hey, it doesn't really make sense for you to have, 2, 3, 4, 5 different providers just to get your products nationwide. And nonetheless, it doesn't make sense for someone to be managing the technology, then for someone else to be managing the logistics, and then for someone else to be managing the fulfillment, because those, as you all know, are so interconnected that it's very important for them to be under the same roof and, very in sync with each other.
I think it's, like you said, it is a brand new space. You've got the advent of all this direct-to-consumer perishable business that's happening. You've got the DoorDashes and everything going on, and I know that's not the same thing, but I think consumers expecting to have groceries delivered to their door is fascinating to me. So I think it's only a matter of time that we see this technology boom in the space, and I think you guys probably leverage some of that. What would you say is some of your big differentiators in the utilization of technology here?
We've seen that the key here is being dynamic. Mm-hmm. When the industry was getting started on both segments, and non-perishable and the perishable world, it was all very flat logic of saying, hey, when a customer in New York City orders this box, I'm always going to ship it, this day of the week with this one carrier, with this one service, with this one box size, and, it's going to be delivered this way. And that's flat logic. The reality is that the logistics network and what's happening nationwide it's changing so fast, sometimes even on a per hour basis, that you need to be able to adjust based on the different variables that could impact the delivery. And so to be very specific about what I mean with this in our industry is, you have, as an example, a box of frozen meat that you need to deliver to someone. It's, let's call it an average order value of $200. But you really have temperatures to the journey that are going to impact that. You have major weather events. You have carrier on-time delivery. You have, the demand or the capacity of what the different final mile carriers are dealing with. You have the different refrigerant variables, the type of refrigerant like a gel pack or dry ice. You have insulation that you need to protect that box with. And these are all, decisions and variables that if you're not dynamic about them, you're either putting the product at risk or you're spending too much money. And none of them, of course, are good to, for a scaling company or for someone that's trying to provide a good service to to the end customer. So that's what was groundbreaking about what we put together a few years ago, is moving away from the flat logic into the dynamic logic, where we're now looking at all these variables to decide on a per box basis, on a per shipment basis, how do you increase probability of success and how do you reduce costs so that you can then keep fueling that growth engine for these brands and making sure they're providing a good service to the final customer. So temperature to the journey, major weather events, carrier on-time delivery, that type of product, that type of insulation, refrigerant, how much refrigerant you add into the box. That's all what adds complexity to our specific industry. And some people might even call us crazy to try to solve a problem as complex as this, but that's what brings the fun into the industry.
So Juan, I think I read that you all have shipped more than $3 billion in perishable goods since 2022. So amazing growth and scalability. What do you see growing or scaling the most quickly in your business right now? Is it frozen, refrigerated? Is it something else? What part of the cold chain are you seeing the most demand for?
In our specific segment, or when you look at specifically at CPGs, definitely frozen, growing faster and more than refrigerated. And the reality is that frozen is easier than refrigerated, because frozen, you have a much wider gap of temperature that you can keep a product on. Or refrigerated, sometimes you're looking at 4 to 8 degrees of just leeway that you have when it comes to those temperatures. So historically, you haven't seen really a lot of successful brands over the years just grow in the specific refrigerated segment, when you've seen a lot more success within the frozen segment. So that's what we've seen as well. It's just easier to manage inventory, easier to manage customer expectation, and that's what we're seeing a lot more growth nowadays.
Do you think that the frozen portion is scaling more quickly, partially because of obviously those operational constraints and as you mentioned, the complexity in refrigerated? Or do you think that consumer demands are changing as Craig talks about all of the time, Americans are getting healthier and trying to stay away from quite, as processed foods, moving towards more perishable, frozen and refrigerated goods. Are you seeing a shift in that demand?
The frozen aisle is having a moment, for sure. And we've seen that for the last 5 years. If you walk into a supermarket or a grocery store in your town, you'll see brands that are, beautiful, bright and new, that they were just not there, even a year ago or 2 years ago. And you see that across every single segment of frozen brands. And it's because of what you were all saying, and Craig also says this, that, hey, consumers are moving into, healthier food choices, and that comes with refrigeration, because just, naturally you need to refrigerate some of this product to be able to keep up with the quality of it.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, I've read numerous things around how the frozen produce is actually probably one of the more healthy or clean versions of some of the produce out there, just due to the timing of the way that they pick these items, because the later in the harvest.
They flash freeze them, they flash freeze them so quickly before they lose any nutrients.
And they also wait till later to pick them, so they're actually further ripe and they get a little bit more nutrition. So how much, I think you said you covered a majority of the country. How much of the country do you cover, and what part is potentially lacking there?
And to your prior point, the flash freezing is the key of it, because you essentially stop the clock. Right. Versus if you have something refrigerated or that's just not refrigerating at all, it just keeps going, and you don't really know when the consumer is gonna get that product, so the clock keeps ticking essentially. Yeah. From a coverage perspective, we get to 80% of the U.S. addresses in 24 hours, and that's with a box of perishable products delivered to their doorstep. The rest of the country in just 48. So we have right now the best nationwide coverage of the industry, the fastest nationwide coverage of the industry, and that's of course what has also helped us grow to this scale and just keep servicing these brands. Because with perishable products, time in transit is the name of the game. You want to make sure that you're getting very fast to your customers, and there's a straight correlation between lifetime value of your customers and how long that box takes to get to the final customer, once you put it on the street, because, the variables are just so many that a lot can happen to that box. To be able to keep quality up, you need to make sure that you're reducing the amount of time that box spends on the road.
So Juan, I read that you're bringing in a new president. Can you tell us a little bit about him and why the timing was right for you guys to fill this role right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Exciting role. If I weren't CEO of this company, I definitely take his role because it's very exciting to be doing that for this company right now and in the industry in general. So we brought in John Hummel as president of Grip's fulfillment unit, and his responsibility is essentially, overseeing and running our nationwide footprint, which is going through a lot of changes and a lot of scale right now as well. Because we're keeping up with our customers essentially, and we're in the forefront of the industry with innovation in terms of the processes and the technologies that we use for direct to consumer, fulfillment of perishable products. And he's the right guy for it. He's been in the industry for a long time. He's ran multi-billion-dollar business units for some of the most recognized companies in the space when it comes to keeping up with these very complex buildings, refrigerated and frozen real estate that are very expensive, very complex, and you need to know a lot about the industry to be able to keep up with the quality that all these brands deserve.
I can only imagine. I mean, it's kind of like you said earlier, like this is kind of a new space that people are growing into. There's so much opportunity here. Having a little bit of experience surely helps you navigate it. Where do you see you guys growing in the near future?
Serving our brands, serving our brands better. We how the main thesis of the company as well is that we've essentially democratized this industry and decreased the barrier to entry, because now you have either the legacy retail players that never thought it was possible to get directly to their customers and always thought that they had to go through retail stores. You now have them essentially moving into this new wave of direct to consumer and owning the customer relationship. But then you also have these other, pure e-commerce brands that have popped up in the space that, have created these beautiful brands and products, and, they have thousands and millions of customers across the country too. So what we've done with the offering is essentially, democratize the space by lowering the entry point or what you need to put together to be able to play in the industry. And that's what we've seen in terms of success with current brands and new partners as well. But it's a lot, in terms of our growth, a lot of technology development. We're a technology first company. We actually started with purely the technology layer, and then we added the physical infrastructure a few years ago as we saw the need for serving our customers. But we're developing a lot of technology in the space, adding new buildings, increasing capacity, and then also adding more complexity and offerings into the logistics space as well.
So as you're seeing this increased demand both within your business for refrigerated and frozen, but really in the industry as a whole, where do you think the industry around cold chain is going? What do you expect to happen in the next year to 3 years?
I mean, you have the two segments, right? You have the retail side, and then you also have the direct to consumer side, but then you also even have the products and the ingredients that you need to put those products together. So as we were just saying before, we've seen a general trend of up and to the right into products that require refrigeration and which could be frozen or cooler / refrigerated. And we've seen a growing demand when it comes to the need for space and the need for services. Now, of course, you had a peak during COVID, and then you had a slight dip after that. But in general, for the next 10 years, we see a growing demand for the space, which might vary year over year, but that's what we've seen so far.
Juan, do you think, so one of my favorite things is I go to Chicago and I get some Chicago pizza. Are you starting to me and my family order us some Chicago pizza every now and again.
We do too.
It's wonderful.
Like par-baked frozen? Yeah.
Right. Do you think that, Grip and the cold chain growth and just this concept is going to continue to grow as people see that, and it's just going to add more volume over time?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit it on the spot. So Giordano's is a partner of ours. We ship their pizzas nationwide. Right. And we launched that partnership not too long ago. And it's about what you're saying. It's a product that you could only access it before in Chicago. And it's, such an iconic brand, such an iconic product that, why not make it nationwide? Like if you're in California or Florida or New York, why can't you get access to this product? And that's what we're seeing with just iconic brands and beautiful products, that they now all of a sudden move from being able to service their customers regionally to now being a nationwide impact. And with the technology that we have in the space and, the things that we've done, you can essentially do it with a flip of a switch. We, of course, takes a couple of weeks to get onboarded and, to understand the systems, but it's much more accessible to, as an example, frozen, deep dish pizza from Chicago that you pop in the oven for, 20, 30 minutes, and then all of a sudden you're, serving this essentially, freshly baked or cooked pizza at home with, the people that you love. So that's what we see. It's delivering all these iconic brands and products to people's doorsteps so that, they can they're either like feeding their family with these, or they're having people over and, bringing out these beautiful products. But it's great to see. It's just great to see all these brands popping up, and either like, old brands and beautiful brands like the Giordano's of the world, or, the innovative brands that are also developing new products in the space.
Yeah, it's very cool. I also imagine that in addition to food, you're seeing a large influx in pharmaceuticals being shipped in cold chain, particularly right. GLP-1s and others, as everyone's getting them delivered to their front doors,
right.
And their monthly refills. Has that made a big impact?
Yes, totally. We in the pharmaceutical space specifically, we have a very big offering within the technology and the logistics space, and we realized a few years ago that the underlying issues, or what you're trying to solve for, is very similar to the direct to consumer space when it comes to food and CPG products, which is how do I increase the quality of delivery and how do I reduce cost? And that's what essentially keeps the industry thriving. And it's very important that farm to home pharma companies that are shipping all these pharma products to home adopt this type of technology and changes, because that's how the industry is going to keep growing, by reducing waste and increasing the service offering for their customers. Because if you, at the end of the day, if you get this GLP product delivered to your home and you can't trust that the supply chain or the cold chain of that product hasn't been compromised, and you get this product delivered to your house, you're just not going to do it again because you can't trust it well enough. So that's where I think it's important to adopt these type of technologies and be very dynamic about how you service your customers so that you can increase the trust and the industry can keep growing. But, to answer your question, yes, we have a pretty big offering when it comes to the technology and the logistics, specifically for, direct-to-consumer pharma products as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Juan, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing these insights into cold chain fulfillment. It has been great, and we hope to have you back.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so Zach, you said all these people getting groceries delivered to their home. Do you not get your groceries delivered?
I don't.
You go to the grocery store?
I mean, I'm a mile and a half away from the grocery store.
I get my groceries delivered at least once a week.
Yeah, no, and I have to drive by it on my way home.
Because then I also don't buy a bunch of stuff I don't like. If I'm there and I'm hungry, I buy all these things. Versus online, I'm probably a little bit disciplined.
I've gotten a little bit more particular about my grocery shopping of late, but it's more about ingredients to me lately. So.
Oh yeah, you are very health conscious. I'm always proud of you.
Well, I'm a data nerd too, so when I find something that interests me, I'll follow it.
All right, well, we've had a great first hour. Stay with us. On the back half of FreightWaves today, we will be...
Freightonomics.
Yeah, into Freightonomics. So stick with us. We'll be right back after the break.
Mm-hmm.
Huge thanks to today's OTR sponsor, again, OTR Solutions. They believe the right partners should know your business, understand your goals, and be there when it really matters. It's no accident that OTR boasts 4.7 stars on Google. They know that excellent customer support is at the center of every relationship. With responsive teams, industry knowledge, and a commitment to long-term growth, OTR gives customers more than service. It gives them a partner designed to help their business succeed. Learn more again with OTR.
Doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Hi, welcome back to the Freightonomics version of FreightWaves today. Zach Strickland, Director of Freight Market Intelligence, DJ Donahue, our new economist, going to join us for the first few minutes here before we bring on Dr. Zach Rogers and get into the weeds with the LMI. So DJ, you know, this is your second time on the show. We're going to go into a little bit of freight market analytics update, introduce everybody to that, and then we'll, of course, discuss some of the new ISM figures that just got released, as well as some ADP data that I think continues to illustrate that we're still in this low hire, low fire type, I guess, stagnant labor market, but it's, I don't know another way to describe it. Well, we'll get into that in a minute, but not a huge week for economic releases, but I think there's been some interesting data that came out this week.
There was.
Yeah.
We had, again, the two big items are the ISM and the PMI, and those we'll talk about more seriously or more in depth. But
yeah. And the freight market, of course, the PMI and ISM, of course, tied heavily to the LTL space. Todd Maiden wrote about this on FreightWaves.com. So I think to get things started, though, given a quick sonar update and a market in two, if you don't like the 7 to 10 minute version that Julie and Craig give, I'll give you a 2-minute one.
I got a watch ready.
All right, let's count me in.
In 3, 2, 1, hit it.
First things first, gotta be the Sonar Tender Rejection Index. You heard Julie talk about this earlier on FreightWaves today. This thing is falling faster than it should, and I think it is primarily a demand-driven situation as we see some continued modal shifting going on because economic demand is still holding up. Total surface transportation demand is actually still holding up. It's just the truckload side, as truckload rates have gone up and capacity has become more strained, we are just seeing shippers try to divert this. It's July. They have time to make some on-the-fly adjustments. So I think that's what we're seeing here. I would not get too caught up in this direction yet. This is still early August, back to school. Everybody's a little distracted. I think we are going to see a little bit more potential upside and reversion back higher later in the year, especially around Labor Day. Let's go to the next chart, which will be spot rates. Just to put this into perspective, dry van spot rates have not come down significantly because when you're getting 13% rejection rates, that's still not sufficient. Capacity remains tight. This is still a very supply-driven flip in the transportation space. So demand, yes, is the softening factor right now, but there's still not enough capacity to cover even that demand with a 13% rejection rate. So refrigerated spot rates are holding up. Flatbed spot rates holding up as well. The flatbed space, of course, getting a lot of pressure from the AI data center output. That should continue. It's also harder to pull drivers into that space. Let's go to the next chart. STVI, you can see it here, tender volumes dropping below spring levels. This is not seasonal. This is not seasonal pressure. This is a little nuanced. And like I said, we go to the last chart to really pull this into perspective. And you can see that uptick, Julie talked about this earlier, uptick in domestic loaded container volumes. That is not seasonal pressure, my friends. And then of course, you're seeing almost the same exact downward pressure on tender volumes in the truckload space. If I was smart, I would have broken that chart out into long haul tender volumes, which is that 800-mile plus band of tender volumes, because the rails don't have a lot of fungibility in that 100-mile and lower space, which that one is growing. Like that one's still going up. The long haul and tweener, as we call it, which is that 450-mile to 800-mile mileage band, which is a challenge for a lot of carriers to deal with. That one's dropping too. So we're seeing these long haul bands, trucking deterioration, and intermodal demand for domestic containers, which is that, it's not coming right off the boat. It's been in the country for a second. Gets translated into the larger containers, JB Hunt, Knight Swift, et cetera. They all have them, Hub Group, et cetera. So it's a modal conversion story right now in the transportation market. And this is a very quick signal, by the way. I mean, I'm talking about the last 2 to 3 weeks. So these aren't monthly figures that I'm reading here. It looks like the shippers came back from July 4th and were like, you know what? I can get a deal on intermodal right now, and I got time to do it.
Let's move.
Let's move. So I want to go right into the ISM here, DJ. So give us the high-level read of the ISM for the past month.
So ISM came in about 1.6 ahead of expectations. They were already expecting an increase, but it came in actually above expectations, which means that the suppliers are out there, the manufacturers, they're feeling better than what we expect. We're seeing more expansion than what we anticipated. And honestly, given what we're seeing, we're seeing a continued increase in growth. It was 70 basis points higher than June. It's been increasing continuously for the past 7 months overall, and it's going even faster in its expansion. So we're starting to see an overall increase in the read. The trick is that when we relate this to the larger economy at scale, the normal marker that ISM uses for looking at general overall economic growth is a consumer inventories marker of greater than about 45, but the inventories marker has been continuously low for the last 22 months.
Yeah.
So we're getting kind of some mixed signals on this as far as like how to look into the future about it.
Right. So the inventory levels, of course, Dr. Rogers, who's coming on bit, and we talk about that more in a broad sense. This is more industrial production, manufacturing, upstream centric type data. Inventories, when they get too low, that means that there's a risk that they're undersupplied. So they don't have the inventories they need, correct?
Correct.
And so there's a risk here that they could be starting to build, they need to start to build those inventories back, right?
That is true, but if it hadn't been for, I would be a lot more excited about it if it weren't down for so long.
Right.
We're seeing two things kind of playing off one another. One is that there are two 22-month windows we're looking at here coming from ISM. One is that prices have been high and the index has been high for 22 months, and we're seeing so prices have been high, consumer inventories have been low.
Right.
So it makes me wonder if because of the instability we're seeing out in the Middle East, if we're seeing with the tariff situation, if shippers and carriers are just kind of, if the shippers in particular are kind of leaning back and say, wait a second, do we just need to kind of keep things low, kind of pull close to the chest and ride out the storm, so to speak? Again, if the prices being high work in that favor, but the consumer inventories being low, they might be undersupplied, but if they were going to be jumping ahead to fix the undersupply problem, I think they might have moved on that already if it weren't for the instability they're seeing. So it suggests to me they're keeping close to the chest.
Okay, so still in a very defensive space.
It's what it feels like to me. I mean, we're seeing an LTL. We're seeing from our news article we put up that there's an increase in like the LTL space, but it makes me think in the shippers more broadly that they're kind of playing close to the chest. You hear this in sentiment. We saw in one of the anecdotes pulled in from the ISM report itself said that conditions are largely unchanged from last month. Demand is stable, but they're not expecting a huge increase. Right. So it sounds like they're kind of, okay, we're not down on the market, but we're not exactly excited about what we're going to be seeing. So things are kind of in that gray space where they might be pulling into excitement, but they're not there yet.
Yeah, and of course, it's become increasingly challenging to measure what's going on in the manufacturing space. You've got a lot of moving parts, so it's hard to measure things the same way that we used to, where we could just say in aggregate things are all moving in the same direction, or they all move together. These correlations between industries have kind of broken apart a little bit, and especially around this AI data center build, which the comments actually highlighted this, and
Absolutely.
I thought that was interesting. Is that anyone that had a direct or indirect tie to data centers or infrastructure that supports data centers, the semiconductor industry, et cetera, were like,
parts.
hey, this is booming. And I can't definitively say, and it doesn't necessarily matter, but because all things kind of roll into one anyway, but it doesn't feel like if you have that, then that's kind of a lot of the explanation of this expansion.
It is. And we see that in other parts of ISM as well.
Right.
There was one combination of data points I saw that was interesting. You saw both imports and exports going up.
Right.
So, imports were bringing in from other countries, where exports were taking what we make and sending it elsewhere. And one of the big spaces we export in are computer parts and machinery, things of that nature. So it suggests that the export is kind of leading the charge, or that computer parts are leading the charge in the export market. The reason we might think that imports would be higher than exports is that looking at the broad base dollar index, looking how the dollar is looking relative to other parts of the economy, while it took a quick turn at the end of last month, it's been generally higher than most of the year in the early part of, in the late part of June, early part of July, when ISM would have been compiling this information.
Right.
We had a high spike in March, but really down in February, leading into April, May, we saw a drop in the federal broad-based dollar index. So it's showing that the dollar is strong in exchange rates against other foreign currencies, which means we would anticipate more imports, that it's easier for U.S. dollars to buy other exchange.
And it hurts exports.
Yes. But we're still seeing both of those driving expansionary, which suggests that the AI impact is still very much there, even though anecdotally, we would suspect from the in-the-weeds AI people who are utilizing AI side, coming from the data science world, I kind of keep abreast of that, and the people who are in the weeds are getting to communicate to managers what AI can and cannot do, and so we might be seeing a slowdown in that space. But from the AI center data building side, it's still growing strong. They're not listening.
Yeah, they don't seem to care. I mean, especially since this is such a huge investment and the ROI is down the road a good bit. It's definitely an interesting component to watch. I think one of my bigger takeaways from the ISM was that employment finally showed expansion.
Yes.
Which I found interesting because we just had some, the BLS, and then, we had the ADP report this week come out.
Yes.
And, did it show anything? Manufacturing was up, I believe, but I can't remember the exact figures. I think it was up.
So manufacturing was up, but it wasn't really a splash. It was more of a drip.
Yeah.
So people love looking at jobs numbers. There are two caveats I always want to throw out with jobs numbers.
Absolutely.
One, they're very volatile. Even ADP revised some of their June numbers. So we saw a revision on June numbers from let me pull up the exact number, make sure I'm giving you right, but it was like from 98,000 down to 95,000 growth last month. So the numbers do get revised. Manufacturing was up 2,000 jobs, but it's an incredibly small percentage. The big story coming out of the industries that are related to shipping was that trade, transportation, utilities was actually down 8,000 jobs. That we actually saw a contraction there, whereas manufacturing and construction were both up. The drop in TTU was greater than the increases in manufacturing construction, but in percent terms, it's all kind of the same because trade, transportation, utilities are such a larger employment market than manufacturing construction.
Right.
So just to put it in perspective, I did the numbers. Trade, transportation, utilities was down 8,000 total jobs, but that's like 0.03%
right.
relative to the almost 30 million jobs in those industries are out there. That's 0.03% month-over-month drop, and at like 0.1% year over year. So we're not talking huge splashes.
It's a rounding error.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't call it quite noise, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, so interesting. I love the context there in terms of the size and scale we're talking about, because I think we all get caught up in some of the aggregate figures and we don't really know what they mean in context. Of course, that's what we're here for. And construction being up 1,000, I mean, the trade transportation component, I think, is a story in the sense that it's hard to imagine in an environment that we're in trucking and transportation, that you can have jobs actually go down in this type of environment. Like, that's fascinating to me. And
well, it's telling an interesting story when you look at the other part of the ADP report, because ADP didn't just talk about employment. They also talked about the wages here. Where are my numbers on that? I know I just sent them out. We actually, for those customers, look in the daily Sonar Daily Watch updates. We have great discussions there talking about employment, and the pay insights were actually where we had a nice story coming together. So the job stayer pay growth was up at 4.5% in construction, 5% in manufacturing, 4.4% in TTU. But what that tells us is that given that we have overall job stayer right at 4.4, TTU is not jumping ahead. You know, you'd expect with a employment contraction that wages would end up going up as employers start trying to grab back more job base. But since you're not seeing the same kind of extra normal pay increases that you would see relative to the job number contractions, what that kind of tells us is that if you take those two together, the capacity tightening we're seeing is coming from actually fewer trucks being utilized and fleet optimization, not necessarily them throwing out a bunch of numbers trying to get more employees on board. So we're seeing still kind of a tight labor market when you take those together.
No, and that squares with a lot of what I've heard and a lot of what we see in some of the data figures in terms of, is this supply-driven cycle that we're seeing actually changing because capacity is growing, or is it something else that's impacting it and talking about intermodal, taking share? There's all sorts of stuff that can influence this, but we're not necessarily seeing huge growth in the capacity side of this space, and employment figures support that to this point. So great stuff there. And of course, the Class 8 orders, we talked about them on FreightWaves today, came out. And I think the breakdown there was very sound. When you look at what ACT reported, we had a downtick month over month. It's a little bit of seasonal softening, and we're not necessarily seeing some sort of huge growth in the orders, but that's probably due more to the constraints of production than it is to the order numbers. And also, we're out of season. Like, we don't order trucks in July. That's later in the year, and they know that they have a 9-month lead time to get deliverables there, and they're already full up. I went to Daimler years ago, one of the OEMs, and it was during the capacity crunch in 2018. And they were like, yeah, if you haven't put in an order by April, you don't get a truck.
You're done.
Yeah, you're done. And I think we're starting to see that here, and ramping is going to be a problem there. Well, DJ, thank you so much for coming on here.
Happy to be here.
You know, we'll be back next week, I think. Maybe. No, we're not. We're not here next week, but future, here in at least 2 weeks, we'll have another economic update from you. So thanks so much.
I look forward to being here again.
And stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back with Dr. Zach Rogers and the LMI.
If you haven't evaluated Motor City Systems software applications and integrations, it's time to take a look. Motor City's team brings deep industry knowledge to help improve carrier operations with its software and integrations, including Roller, customizable driver app and workflow, Relay, advanced messaging and communication, Torque, integration platform, Wire, modern EDI, TUT. Visit motorcity.systems to learn more.
Doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to Freightonomics. And up next, of course, we have the illustrious, still summer vacationing, I think, Dr. Zach Rogers, that's going to give us the latest take on the LMI Logistics Managers Index. Dr. Z, welcome back.
I got 10 days left, so I hope you know what you mean to me and how much I love Freightonomics. That 10% of the rest of my summer.
It's never in question on this end. I do feel the love continuously, so I appreciate it.
Well, let me share a little more with you, by the way. I got to come to your defense. Normally, I'm a big fan of Julie, but I love going to the grocery store. Get outside. Look at all this stuff. There's no greater example of how well supply chains work or the utility of capitalism than walking through an aisle and being like, look at all these peaches. I love going to the grocery store. People should get out. They should go. Appreciate the farmers, appreciate the supply chains, and also the layout. I mean, you walk into the grocery store, there's the vegetables. Oh, it's so fresh in here. You take one more step. It's the bakery. It smells so good. The milk and the eggs are in the back. People should go. People should go to grocery stores. I love them.
I didn't need convincing, but you made me want to go to the grocery store today. With that,
I went twice yesterday, actually, because I forgot something the first time. But it was a delight both times.
Man, well, speaking of grocery stores, we talked about cold chain stuff earlier. It's we're in that. I don't know. It's an interesting time of year for transportation. A little bit of produce is going on. We get some harvests this time of year that really make an influence on the freight market. We're seeing some level of that, but the lettuce outbreaks, that's been kind of a wonky thing that's gone on. I don't know if it's increasing demand or disruption or it's reducing it at this point as people kind of take that away. Are you seeing or hearing anything from some of your contributors in that space?
One thing I saw that's interesting is that there's more local stuff going on now, because people are worried about maybe the Taylor Farm stuff or just generally Mexican lettuce. I have seen more people are trying to source locally, and there's certain chains that really pride themselves on local produce sourcing. And so I've seen some stuff. Actually, I think it's getting hotter for those. And it speaks to some of what you were talking about earlier with, we're still good in the short run OTR right now. Like short run OTR, and I mean really everything is up. But I think it is fueling some of that local movement around because you're not going to put a local head of lettuce on a train. And so that's the only part I'm seeing. The other thing I will say, remember we talked in January, I was like, oh, maybe reefer will be a big thing for GLPs in January because that's when people try to get in shape. I was wrong. apparently it's just always going to be a big thing forever. Amazon today announced like, they'll do GLPs for cheaper delivery and stuff. And so maybe it's not a seasonal thing anymore. I thought it was just January, but it's hot Ozempic summer, man. Everyone is
Listen,
just going all year.
health and well-being is a year-round thing. It is not seasonal.
That's right.
As much as I would argue that Thanksgiving starts the down season for me in terms of health and wellness. So let's get into the LMI, because I think your data actually, it's almost like I can tell what you're going to say. And after watching the daily figures each month, I'm like, there's going to be a little bit of a pullback. I think I was a little off guard last month. In some case, because you did have a little bit of a step down, but the step back in July in some of your indices does not shock me in the slightest, just because the second most vacationed time of year after Christmas and New Year's. So what do you see? What was your big takeaway?
Well, and step back's a relative term, right?
Yeah.
So overall index came in at 68.9 this month. And again, for people who have seen us talk about this before, 50 is break even.
Right.
And so anything above 50 is expansion. 68.9 is down from really, it's actually our lowest reading since, I believe, March. And we had been up in the 70s. We were 71.1 last month. But 68.9 is still a really strong number. I love this picture you guys have right here, because going back for 4 years, sure, 68.9, if you just zoomed in on that most recent couple months, that's pretty big. But that's down a bit. But you can see it would have been the highest reading we've had any time in 2025, 2024, or 2023. And actually, so far, because I just ran the numbers for the average overall size of the index going back for the 10 years that we've been doing it. This is our second highest year on record so far. So on record, so far through the first 7 months, the average LMI number is the somewhat ominous reading of 66.6. In 2021, it was 71.4. So that's the only other time it's been higher. And so we are taking a step down, but it's a relative step down versus what had been a really out of the box sort of expansion for the logistics industry. Now, what are the changes? Well, it's interesting because costs remain the driver. And just like it was last time we were up this high in 21 and a little bit in 22, costs are the driver of the expansion right now in the index. Where we really saw things drop off this month relative to June was in inventory levels. So inventory levels last month was 60.5. This month it was 55 even. Now what's interesting is almost all of that comes from the retail side. So we always break our numbers out into upstream and downstream. Well, last month, upstream read in at 59.1. This month, 59.0. Almost no change. Downstream, last month was 66. This month is 46.3. So like a 20-point drop relative to a 0.1 drop upstream. And it's really, it gets to a couple things. One is what you were talking with DJ earlier, the sort of expansion in manufacturing has been slow and steady. I mean, it truly is right now. Upstream and downstream is the tortoise and the hare, where upstream, manufacturing is we're just bringing stuff in. Now, some of it I think is to get ahead of potential shortages. If we continue to have an energy crunch, and whereas as downstream is just like stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. Last month was a go month, partly because the consumer retailers had been trepidatious, I think, about are consumers going to show up this year, yes or no, with inflation being where it is. Mm-hmm. And the signal consumers have continued to give is, yeah, we are. And so retailers really started pulling forward a lot of inventories. We saw at the end of May, and then June, a lot of it really, we saw a lot of inventory get pulled forward. Right. Some inventory actually is being sold off now. It's back to school stuff got pulled forward kind of at the last second. It was like, very JIT. with the retail inventories, which I think is one of the reasons why we saw inventories go negative this month downstream. At the same time, I think they were pulling forward some holiday stuff, not all holiday stuff, but some. And that was, I think, partly a correct bet. It turns out that the 338 tariffs were going to come in, and we're going to make some things more expensive, the Section 338 tariffs. And so I think that the decision that retailers have made in terms of let's just pull stuff forward and maybe we'll sit. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if we start to see a dynamic similar to what we saw in 25, where a lot of stuff gets pulled into the United States and then sits at the wholesale level and then drops down to retailers in October. That system has really been perfected in some ways. I started doing it in COVID, and now it works great. And essentially, I think what retailers are betting on is we have more faith in the consumer showing up than we do in knowing what the tariffs are going to be in 3 months. The consumers are a more sure bet right now. And so I think that's one of the reasons they're pulling forward. That chart you just had up a second ago, showing the difference between inventory levels and costs, speaks to a lot of what we're talking about. Because our inventory levels this month, like we said, we're a 55. Inventory costs are 77. That's a 22-point delta. Average all time, I think for this number is like 13. Basically, what this is telling us is that the relative cost of inventory is going up at a really fast rate of expansion. If you split it out for downstream, it's 46 for inventory levels, 72 for inventory costs. So it's a 26-point spread. And so inventories have gotten relatively more expensive, which I think is one of the reasons you see, like you're talking about, this just weird sense of uncertainty in the economy, because we have this, on one side, spending is high. People are buying stuff. It's great. On the other side, costs are really high. And so it's almost like we're walking on this tightrope. And we're like, well, as long as spending doesn't fall off, the high costs are okay. But the second spending drops, these high costs are going to be a real problem. It's very similar to the no hire, no fire thing. No hire is fine as long as there's no fire. And right now, high costs are fine as long as spending continues, but it's why everyone is being, I think, so cautious. And one of the reasons, which I'm sure we'll get to in a couple minutes, why capacity is not moving at all, because nobody wants to spend any money when we don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, this is the theme. Like this is it in a nutshell. You can have this discussion beyond transportation, beyond logistics. It's the economy. It's the global scale of things. Like I watch CNBC in the mornings. I'm a finance guy, so I love the markets. But they debate this.
That box is squawking over there.
The squawk box. Let's go. I mean, I was watching, the Kevin Warsh thing kind of blew everyone up because they were like, we need guidance. You're going to do something, but we don't know what it is. Are you going to do anything? You know what? We'll just act like you are. And the bond market.
The Fed chair telling everybody, no, I want you to guess, was bold. I thought that was an interesting strategy.
And I don't have a strong opinion either way. What he says makes total sense to me. Like I want the markets to tell me I shouldn't control the market with my predictions. Like I shouldn't set you up to do whatever you're doing. You should do what you're doing, and then I'm going to respond to it. That makes total sense to me. But we've had this environment where for years the Fed has given them the dot plots and all the things to kind of go by, and now they've got to adjust to it, which in this period of time where everything else feels very up in the air, like we just talked about, it does give businesses, I think, a little bit of reason to be like, I'm going to be hesitant about moving forward with things, unless you're investing in AI, which even they're starting to at least talk about. Maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of spending and building. But that aside, a lot of the businesses that I talk to do, like what you said about dancing this line of, we're not going to order too much, we're not going to have too little, we're going to try to dance this very thin razor blade of activity. And I think that puts this second half in a very interesting spot, at least from our perspective. I think you and I are going to have a great second half, despite whatever the economy does, because we get to watch and see what's going on. Because some of the movements that we're seeing. I just, it's like costs are high, inventories drop a little bit. Like that spread is fascinating to me. What's some of the stuff are we going to continue to see inventory costs stay like in this accelerated place of growth, or is that going to go away at some point?
That is the expectation at the moment with our future predictions. And, getting back to the worst thing, I agree with you. I think his approach is reasonable if there's certainty. Yeah. If it was just a boring, inflation 2.1%, markets, right. I think no one would care. But the fact that there was 3 dissenting votes in that last meeting, that's why I think people were like, hey, can you give us, because the Fed minutes itself sent a mixed message. Right. So then I think a mixed on top of a mixed economy. Right. That's why, right? I think you can't have 3 variables. You got to have at least one certainty, I think. So thinking about our future predictions, so it's actually very interesting to me because it's more upstream folks. It's more the manufacturers who are worried about increased costs. When we look at future predictions for inventories, downstream is actually at 68.8, which suggests to me that downstream does imagine bulking up. And again, I think that is a bet on consumers going forward. Their inventory costs are 73.4. Now, anything over 70 is pretty robust expansion, but that's only like a 5-point delta between levels and costs. So they are betting on costs will be high, but maybe spending will stay high and we'll be okay. Upstream is totally different. Upstream, the split is fascinating to me. And again, upstream would be like wholesalers, manufacturers, folks like that. Their inventory predictions over the next year is 50 even. So basically like kind of, again, like what you're talking with DJ, slow and steady. Mm-hmm. We're at a good level and we just want to keep pushing it forward. And one of the reasons we don't want to go too high is because their inventory costs are 84.7. So there's like a 35-point delta right there. And people are worried about the relative cost increases of key critical components, especially for manufacturing. And I mean, we just came out and said, hey, maybe it's going to be whatever, 50% on stuff from Canada, and there's 60 countries that maybe have the labor issues that could trigger these 338 tariffs. And then the thing underlying all of that, because I think the tariffs is one piece of it. The other thing is, Iran announced their new plan for the Strait of Hormuz, and it doesn't sound like a great plan. Like Oman is fine. They can go through. Everybody else, we're not sure. And so the U.S. oil reserves are down to the lowest level since 1983. Right. So, lowest they've ever been in my life. And I think the cost of fuel here, right? The cost of fuel here is, well, gas is more expensive. In other parts of the world where a lot of these components come from is we might have to turn the factory off or only run it 4 days or run it, but the cost is going to be very baked in. And so because of that, both sides of the supply chain are expecting cost increases for inventory, but it is really pronounced upstream, partly because I think upstream is a little more international facing and their suppliers are going to be a little more sensitive to changes in the cost of tariffs and the cost of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I can't iterate enough. Like, yes, America has resources and capabilities. We have our, obviously, oil. Talking to John Kingston is one of my favorite things to do. Our oil, he's worked in the industry since I was in diapers. And it was hearing about all the different ways that, you've got, yes, America makes light crude that's very conducive to make gasoline, but our factories, refineries actually don't refine it that way because we're used to a heavier crude for our refiners, so we have to send it across. Anyway, point being, we have an interconnected supply chain around the world, and regardless of what we can do here and can't do here, we have a downstream, upstream influence all over the place with our supply chains. And a single Strait of Hormuz, I mean, this is one little slip of land that has basically sent the global environment into complete chaos economically. Like that's what's holding us hostage at the moment in a lot of cases. And I think this is going to be an ongoing theme until it's not. But how much do you think this plays into your reports that you're getting now from your respondents? Are they mentioning that they're concerned about upstream production cost, et cetera, because of the Strait of Hormuz being so volatile and unpredictable?
That's certainly what it seems like with these. I mean, you compare, so right now we see this steady buildup in manufacturing inventories. We've been in like the high to mid 50s for all year, basically. And they're saying, but by next year, because we think the cost might be another 10 points up,
right,
then maybe what we're bringing in will be 10 points down, and we'll just be sort of maintaining. And so this is maybe even more than the tortoise and the hare, it's the ant and the grasshopper, where the ants save up for winter every day. And then, the retailers are kind of the grasshopper, just, whatever. But because they know that their suppliers are the ants, actually is why. And so manufacturing has really been building up, I think, because they're worried about potential rainy days. And look, the thing is, we have no idea when this could stop. I mean, it's interesting. I went to the EIA and just pulled their diesel data for the last year. And here's what's a really interesting number to me. So from August 4th of last year, diesel was $3.80 a gallon. February 23rd this year, it was $3.81. So it moved like a penny in 6 months. Right now, it's $5.35. And I picked February 23rd because that was the last reading before we went into Iran. Now, in the middle of July, it was down to $4.59 when it was like, hey, traffic is flowing. We had one day where 70 ships went through. Now we're back up to $5.35. And so we've had all this volatility, and it's reflected, by the way, in our transportation prices. Transportation prices came in at 86.9 this month, which is down 5 points from where we were. We're finally not in the 90s after there for 3 months in a row. But 86 is still really fast rate of growth. And then the other side of it, and this is why the uncertainty matters, is that capacity is at 28.4. Transportation capacity is at 28.4, which is tied with April as the second lowest reading we've ever had for any metric in the 10 years we've had the index. And so we have this weird, in addition, one of the reasons we're walking the tightrope or dancing on a razor blade, which sounds awful, by the way, is that on one side we have prices are high. So you would think, okay, in a normal environment, right, our demand curve goes up here. Well, we better increase supply so we can get back in equilibrium. But right now, the relative cost of increasing supply is high, and we don't know if demand's going to fall down if the Strait opens back up, or tariffs change, or inflation starts to hit consumers hard. And so we're not seeing the fleets grow, I don't think, in the way we would normally see them. We would expect them to grow. I mean, it's been 5 months now that we've had really high transportation price readings. We would expect capacity to start to go up a little bit. And I know there's some labor market stuff in there too, with the English language and all that stuff, but we are really not seeing capacity come online the way we normally, I think, would expect to, partly because of how everyone got burned in 22 and 23, but also because we don't know what 27 is going to look like.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have heard this from numerous carriers. The publicly traded guys are obviously not going to say they're going to invest in huge fleet growth or anything like that. But what you say and what you do, it does look like, at least from the earnings reports I've looked at, and obviously the people that I talk to, I still have a lot of connections in the space. The real story is that they're not, like, recruiting's a problem, labor market is an issue, but you've got this broker liability, Montgomery Carib thing that now you've got this additional layer of vetting that's going on. And then the carriers themselves they're not really excited to start investing like they did in 2018 in trucks. And I mean, like I mentioned earlier on the ACT report, the Class 8 orders, yeah, they were better than last year, as you would expect, but anything would have been better than last year in terms of Class 8 orders, because they're basically, all you had to do is beat zero. But it's not like they don't have the capability of ramping that type of production, and they're not going to have the drivers to sit there. So when I see the tender rejection rates come down, and I see your transportation pricing chart, which we should bring up again because it has my fun lines that I like to draw on it, where I highlight, here's COVID and here's whatever 2018 was. That's when I see that happening, like, it's not a strong movement. Like, it's kind of just, we're slightly adjusting. and it's more the same, but at a different level. So I still feel like this market, since it is a supply led, and I still don't think that I'm doing it justice as what a supply led shift means. Like we hear supply. Actually, you know what I want to do? I want to ask you how to explain why supply led economics is different than demand on any level, because I think that's a very valuable thing to hear from somebody who knows how to explain it.
Right. Well, and yeah, I do appreciate, by the way, that you've turned into John Madden, just drawing. Next month when I come on, can you say like, boom, when you draw one of them on there? That would be really.
You know what? I did ask them for like, if I could get a pen, I would actually have great fun with sonar charts.
The czar of the teleprompter. Yeah. Okay. So, so demand versus supply. So the supply side crunch that we're in right now, whether it's inventories, fuel, whatever, is we're not making enough to meet demand, right? And supply is so much harder to address than demand, because when demand goes up, if supply is not much of a constraint, I increase supply, or we increase prices and maybe demand can come down. It's one of the problems. I think the Fed is in a terrible position right now, because I don't know that raising interest rates is going to do anything for anybody. Right. And you can say, hey, inflation's up, we need to raise interest rates. I don't know that things being more expensive is going to bring inflation down, because inflation right now is driven on the supply side just as much as it's driven on the demand side. Yeah, the consumers are showing up and spending, but they're spending more because 20% of the oil in the world can't get through that little slip of water. Right. And that oil feeds then into almost everything else, right? There's nothing that we produce without energy. And so the Fed is in, I think, a terrible position. Because, I would probably be holding rates steady right now myself, because, unemployment's fine. And all these costs are coming from the supply side. For transportation specifically, I think, these folks touched the stove in 18 and 21 and got so burned by the crashes in 19 and 22 and 23 that they're just like, yeah, prove it. Prove that this and then maybe we'll grow. And then on the shipper side, right, or the 3PL side, you're like, if we choose the wrong carrier, apparently it costs us $600 million. Right. And so I think they're very nervous to make any moves, and employment continues to be an issue. And then components. Here's the other piece. Building. It's not like we just build the trucks in Ohio and that's where every part comes from. The transmissions cross between US, Mexico, and Canada 8 times, and the USMCA doesn't exist anymore. And so we have all of these uncertainties on uncertainties on uncertainties, and the lack of supply is really one of the things that's driving inflation as much as we see it. The reason we can't get inflation down is not because consumers are spending too much money. We want consumers to spend too much money. The reason we can't get inflation down is because we don't have the supply to match demand. When you're in Economics 101, you draw the graph. You don't just draw a demand line, you draw a supply line. And the supply line is where we've been having problems all through 2026.
And of course, the Fed's function of raising the cost of borrowing is a demand, like it's a demand function. Like it's supposed to push down demand, so that you don't have.
Push down supply too. That's the thing. It's also going to push down supply. Yeah,
the way I explain it to people for transportation specifically, it's like, well, we have a supply problem that's inflating rates. If you raise interest rates in that environment, you may get a little bit less demand, but you're also not going to have companies invest in purchasing trucks because now the cost of getting the supply up goes up with it. So that makes
CapEx outside of data centers right now is frozen. We had 1.5% expansion in GDP for the last quarter, and I was taking a look at where it's come from. I mean, 1.2% of it basically is just data centers, and then inventories were down. Private inventories were down about 0.7%. Like that took 0.7% off, and the import-export change was another percent basically, because we had so many imports coming in Q2, and so really. It's consumer spending, which stayed strong, data center investment, those are pushing us up, and then everybody pulling back on inventories and pushing up on imports as like rainy day inventories. That's why GDP is weird. And I think that those Q2 GDP numbers really speaks to this weird parallel world we're living in where demand is good, but costs are scary. And nobody knows what to do with those two things.
What are we looking at for the next? We got a minute and a half left. What are we looking at over the next little bit? What are our predictions for the rest of the year?
I think that we're going to see, again, sort of the human shield strategy that we saw last year. I would expect wholesale inventories to go up. I also think that's one of the things driving intermodal is that we're moving this inventory that doesn't have to get anywhere particularly quickly right now. And then I would guess that we'll get to October. And right now, the consumers are sending signals that they're going to show up and we're going to have a peak season and we're going to sell things through. But until we get some more certainty, I can't see a lot of CapEx outside of, basically the subsidized data center stuff that we're seeing now. Now, it's been good for warehouses because we need places to put all these materials. Right. But it would be great. Right now, it's almost like we're our stock market portfolio, and the only stocks we have is data centers. And if anything happens to those, we are not incredibly diversified.
Man, a single stock portfolio. I think even the bond market is not the safe haven it once was either, according to a lot of people. Well,
that's why they're selling bars of gold at Costco. They're like, it's better than nothing.
I mean, you can sell whatever you want at this point. We don't know. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Z. We will chat again in a month when you are in class in a more professional way. You can have a serious discussion, not this summer, Dr. Rogers. And of course, thanks everybody for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow for more FreightWaves Today.
I'm still not wearing a jacket.
Watson with FreightWaves, and we are having our latest edition of the Lean Quarterly Dive. We're catching up with the folks at Lean Solutions Group and Alfonso, talking about AI and technology, how it works, how you should use it. Going to be a great conversation here. Super excited to be diving in, so let's get to it. I'm going to welcome on Alfonso. Sir, pleasure to get to speak with you for the first time. Before we begin with this edition, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Thomas. Happy to be here. Happy to always chat with my FreightWaves friends. Tell you a little bit about myself. First and foremost, I'm Colombian. I've been the Chief Technology Officer at Lean for about 10 years, give or take. So I've been around since the very beginning. So I've seen all the different stages of Lean. We're going through quite a transformation right now with everything AI. But sort of in the beginning of the logistics nearshore boom, we were right in the middle of that. If anything, we pioneered it, and I got to see all of that. So I'm pretty excited about what we're going to be, doing next here. And I think I have a pretty important role when it comes to the technology side of things, or so they say. But I'm hoping that the future is very bright for Lean when it comes to tech.
Well, let's talk about the technology as well, because that's one of the big things is, AI. And so not only are folks talking about AI and uses of automation, they're talking about uses of adaptability. Being in the game for, over a decade, talk about y'all's experience not only coming across the AI, but what are you hearing in terms of how it's being used? Because that's one of the big topics of this year, it feels like, for sure, has been the rapid pace and acceleration of AI capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen pretty much everything at this point. We have heard from the frontier labs for a while that it's the year of agents, and we're going to apply agentic workflows, and we're going to automate jobs away. And that it seemed to have been the message for 25, which didn't really land as strongly as these OpenAI, Claude, and all these big frontier labs suggested that they would. But now I'm seeing kind of it's kind of a more difficult or challenging trend for companies that are trying to start with AI. I'm seeing that the experimentation phase is mostly over. You tried it, you kind of went into it with not a lot of experience. Companies that didn't necessarily have technology teams all of a sudden found themselves investing a ton of money into it to try to see, does this thing work? And I guess what they're seeing now is, if I don't have the right infrastructure to support these technology projects, I'm not going to get anywhere, right? So even if the technology has democratized access and now everybody could just jump on it and download OpenAI and Claude and all that stuff, doesn't mean that you are an AI company. So the typical things that happen in a traditional software world are coming up, which is that you actually need good project management, you need good change management, you need to have good control of your costs. Who knew? And I think I'm seeing this more and more where companies are seeing, maybe I wasn't as prepared to take on some of these projects myself. As a company that is focused on A in the context of what we're speaking is logistics. I do supply chain. I move things from A to B. But then I'm finding myself trying to become a technology company at the same time and have all these tech muscles that I didn't have before, and it's just hard. So I'm seeing that our customers are looking for answers on how to balance the internal proprietary nature of these solutions that they want to have. Like they want to have something that's theirs, but at the same time, how do they bring in an outside partner that can help them sort of fill in those gaps that they clearly don't have, or they're just starting to form, and help them implement these technologies without breaking the bank. There's a stat that I just saw recently. So there's this vibe coding company called Lovable. Not sure if you're familiar with it, but an independent publisher put out there that 99% of vibe coded apps are in the garbage. Like they're not making any money. They get published and then get unpublished from the infrastructure platform. So like what we're seeing is that garbage in, garbage out. Like even if it's faster to create technology, doesn't mean that you're going to create more businesses. That promise is well overhyped, but there's a silver lining. There's something that happens once you get to that other side, which is what I'm really, really excited about where this is going, at least in the next quarter or 2 quarters of this year.
That's one of the topics you mentioned was, these frontier models. It did feel like, in terms of selling it to executives and businesses, the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's the new version of electricity. It's the dawn of all of this. But then at the same time, now in 2026, it does feel like, at least from my experience, I don't see any more of those AI wrappers as much. I don't see as much of those agentic apps that you're alluding to. Now what I'm seeing is the organization saying, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to vibe code it. Oh, crap, I got to figure this out now. Is that one of the big things, I guess, when we're talking about, especially being in the game over a decade, was, is it like a tide, a ebb and a flow? Like, you had a great point about finding the right partner. Are we kind of migrating towards that situation where we've got to figure out how to do it in a process and very deliberate manner, when it felt like the past 6 months to a year ago, it was very much a scatter shot, throw everything at the wall, just kind of figure it out, and it's like just going to change everything.
Absolutely. And you have to get past that point where you think that because you have this powerful app that lets you produce either an app or a solution, and it seems to work, but in reality, it's very brittle. And then when you apply it in real life and in production, it can cause some pretty important damage within your business. It could cause damage at the customer level, which is definitely what you don't want, or even to internal systems, cyber and all that stuff. I mean, that is still very, very important. And like what I'm seeing, so the shift that I'm seeing right now is that AI is starting to become this thing that it is better not being said, but being there than the other way around. So you kind of have to make it invisible in a way for it to be adopted as it should within organizations. And what I mean by that is that you have a lot of these like AI native companies, and they go and they try to solve this problem that, a couple of years ago, we would have just said, get a couple programmers in there and, create an algorithm that would be able to analyze a set of rules. And based on the input of those, then the rules would analyze a consistent outcome. And it was as simple as that. But now everything has to be an AI first solution. So you're taking something that would have otherwise been pretty simple and now using AI for it. And the unpredictable nature of the outcome is causing issues. And so you're kind of better off saying, I'm going to bring automation into my company rather than being an AI first or AI native solution. I'm going to bring automation, and that automation can have AI components when it's necessary, but no more than that. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. It's just, I guess it's how companies start to mature about all technologies. This has happened several times within our lifetimes with, major technology revolutions. And I don't, this is different for sure, but it doesn't mean that the way that technologists are going to adapt to it is going to be much different. I think companies will eventually find that they need to weigh into their technology infrastructure teams a lot to be able to make this really work for them in the long run.
Well, it brings it into the people angle as well. One of the things, I was very fortunate to work on early iterations variant at US Express talking about automated load planning. This was back in 16, 17, 18. We were happy with machine learning back in my day. And one of the challenges was getting the people on board and the process to adopt the tech. And so do you think that's one of the larger changes now we're seeing? Because it felt like conversations I had with companies and interviews I've had was these executives would say, man, I used AI for everywhere. There's thousands of possibilities and I pissed off half my staff. And then now, like you said, they're hiding it like the M-dash. You've kind of got to be very measurable. Is that one of the things talk to me more about the people angle, because I'm starting to feel like we are, that's going to be one of the big pendulum swings is now we're going to lean more towards the people, when it felt like over a past year, it was like tech. It's just like visibility, throw it at the wall. It's going to fix it all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I even said last conversation I had with FreightWaves, we talked about predictions. What is happening? Like, we were in the middle of a talent crunch back in, I want to say early 2015, 2014, where logistics companies were just starting to get into this near shore and groove in Colombia, which, big BPO companies didn't necessarily play in that space, but we found a very good niche where brokers would just utilize the crap out of us for all of their back office positions, but this was very new for them. And they couldn't find people in the US to perform those jobs, at least not consistently. They had high attrition and all that stuff. And, that talent crunch allowed us to insert ourselves and create a business and be able to work with some of the most reputable brokers out there in the industry. What I see now is that there is a second wave of talent crunch, but that involves people that are sort of AI ready. Like, they have the mentality, they have the capability to incorporate AI into their workflow and not have it feel like a threat. Because the moment that you go into a more sort of traditional team that has never had the experience of having AI before, you're dealing with all sorts of different problems. You have people that are thinking you're going to eradicate my jobs away, and you're going to, it's like, why do I have to collaborate with this person that is literally working in order to try to remove me from their day-to-day? And companies don't have an established teams normally for this AI wave of change management. So I think that this next talent crunch is really interesting. I think companies are going to want to find talent out there that sits at the intersection between operations, business, and technology. In a way, you have to be able to move between knowing what the right metrics are that allow me to show that this really is providing value for the business, knowing how to implement it, and what does technology implementation really look like? What are the drawbacks? What are the safety mechanisms that I need to implement? And then obviously you need to be able to be really good at your job. You can't just try to implement AI on a broken process or broken people for that matter. If you try to essentially take AI and put it on a person, let's say that is an underperformer, it's a very common misconception. You're not going to fix bottom performers by implementing AI solutions and reframing the workflow. You're going to actually increase the output of errors into your system, potentially. So another way to look at this is that you have to there's this concept in software development that's called cross-pollination, which is like you have very strong technology teams that sometimes you want to convert into pods that have greater coverage capacity amongst other projects that are adjacent to your own. So you take some of the best people from a core group and you cross-pollinate them in these new pods so that they can provide new value. Similarly, something like that has to happen within AI implementations, even in your most basic positions, track and trace, carrier sales. You're not going to just expect, or you shouldn't expect, that you're just going to take a team that has zero AI knowledge or zero knowledge of how to apply it, and then all of a sudden take it to 100% and have that be, as accurate as, or as fruitful as doing it with an experienced team or somebody that already has this experience.
It reminds me of in my corporate days, I was a challenge with things like SharePoints and Excel. And so you would think, everyone has an idea of what an Excel spreadsheet is, but within the organization, this tool was so important that they needed to make sure managers understood it, how you had the basic ideas of pulling data. And so I kind of liken, it reminds me of what you're telling me about with AI. You need to make sure you have within your organizations the folks who are familiar with it so you can kind of disseminate it down and help train and help get people familiar, because that's one of the bigger things that we're kind of alluding to is now we're treating it like a tool. And now that we know that it can be a tool and not just this magical thing, we need to make sure that the people are trained up and competent. Is that one of the things that you're going to foresee as well, is that now we're going to see kind of a big push in some of these organizations? I'm thinking freight brokerages as well, is that you've got to kind of adjust the playbook and the workflow now to make sure people are familiar with these terms just as much as the concept of hours of service, driver. It's adding more on the plate, and you got to get more smart and more meaningful in how you're going to use this stuff.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I would disagree with their comment is that I don't think it's a tool. I think it's an employee. Like, I think if you look at what AI is, it's like another employee that, if you try to, do the analogy with what do you do with a junior employee that joins your company? You train them. You ensure that you give them a very defined job description so that they know exactly what they need to do. And not only their traditional, line of work, but also in the exceptions. What else do you need? You need a very defined SOP. You need to ensure that your process is well documented and that you account for potential errors in the process. Again, exception management. What else do you need to do with a new employee? You need to have continuous training. You need to close the loop, right? And what I see is Lean is awesome at this, and this is where again, I was alluding to how we made a business out of just having great change management, being able to find great people. But if you want those people to stick around for a long time and have that low attrition, you have to make sure that you close that loop. It's no different with the AI agents. So what happens when you throw a new employee into a process? You don't have any of that stuff that I just mentioned, and you're not closing the loop. You're eventually going to have to fire this new employee, which is another thing that I'm seeing very, very frequently now, which is this upstart of AI projects that happened earlier in 25 that all of a sudden are finding ways to get out. And they're saying, look, we had this problem, this problem, this problem. And, it's obviously we don't want that to happen. It's a shame. I called it, I was telling some of our customers, we recently had a customer advisory board and we watched the World Cup, USA versus Paraguay, which was amazing, by the way. We took some customers out there in LA and had a really good time. And one of the things that a customer was telling me is like, how do you treat AI in, like, for example, in your P&L, and how do you treat it from a strategy perspective? And I told them, well, it's changing, but it's still very much an R&D line item for a lot of companies. It still has to feel like you're really putting in the effort, not with the intent that you're necessarily going to get 100% of it back. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that it has to be perfect, but you need to force yourself to go through this transformation, which is going to be a little painful. But back to the point about, the junior employee and everything, it's like you have to have the minimum set up for this to be able to work in its first iteration, which is, SOPs, job descriptions, all that good stuff.
All right, Alfonso. So one of the big things, of course, is talking about AI cost, managing the cost. Are you token maxing or not maxing, or can you be addicted to Claude and other LLM frontier models? As we're looking ahead, let's talk a little bit more about that aspect, because, as these organizations are deploying the AI, it looks like there's even more things to take into account if you want to get the right results.
Yeah, I think everybody's token maxing at this point. You have every single leading AI company out there saying that they have hundreds of thousands of agents deployed across their companies. And so they're building probably more than they're getting out of it. Microsoft said this, but at the same time, I think they're also sending an important message, is that it's not free. So you got the Uber example. These guys said we burnt through all of our token budget in the first quarter. You got Microsoft decommissioning Claude licenses. And I think, the main issue with that is that you get hooked on it. We're hooked on it. We have all of our engineers using Claude. We're big proponents of having this AI first strategy towards coding, but that doesn't mean that there's a shift that's coming. And I think every leading AI company is also saying you have to start thinking about your own AI models. I think that's the next direction that this is going to go. Even if you are an avid user of Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, and you're connecting to these, if you're a serious AI company and you're providing AI solutions to your customers, you have your own models. And whether it's open source models that you're hosting, and you're dramatically decreasing your associated cost because of it. You're always going to have some frontier labs in there because they are the best of the best. But there's so much money being dumped right now into the open source community. I mean, right now, Anthropic is in this big legal battle with a Chinese company that apparently stood up 28,000 computers to try to mine data from Claude. They caught them, so now they're in this whole heated exchange. And but everybody's just trying to create this open source mega model that you could just have and store in your computers. But I think that's primarily the next phase. Is just store your own models. You alluded to something previous conversations back. It's like models are getting much better. I actually question, are they? I don't believe so. If you look at Mythos, I'm not sure how you say that one, but the latest Claude release, where apparently it was the most incredible AI humanity has ever seen, to the point where the US had to block it internationally, and this could cause so much harm across cyber. I don't doubt that. That is true. I've seen the benchmarks. But when you compare it to what you have the capability to do today, it's about 6 to 7% better. That's the gap that we're seeing from current models. But at the same time, it's twice as expensive. So you have the ability to consume hell on earth in terms of tokens at the expense of 7% more than what you did before. And in my eyes, this seems more like a strategy to monetize and pump, this AI narrative, rather than actually a humongous stride in AI improvement. I think we're really good as it is, but we're definitely in the law of diminishing returns right now. It's not that every single model is going to be twice as better as the previous one, which gets you thinking. It's Does that mean that we're at a point where the open source community can provide me better bang for my buck for deploying AI models than what the frontier labs are going to do? It's yet to be seen. We're doing it, but it's not easy. Now it requires technology knowledge, infrastructure. You require DevOps experience. So now you're back to the basics. You need to have a technology team to implement this thing to begin with.
I think you brought up a great point. I think it was Ford or another company had to hire on some engineers that they had let go, a large automotive OEM, because they were like, oh crap, I did too much. I didn't think about that. I had some conversations about who's using your data. So like everyone's talking about how AI has destroyed SaaS. It used to be you paid a guy, they'd manage your warehouse and your stack, and then, they would give it to you in these charts and KPIs and all that jazz. Do you think the future moving forward is, like you said, I need my own homebrew model? Because if I'm a logistics company, that's my goal, that customer information, the lane data, but I'm just feeding it up to like a frontier lab and they're just plugging into my stuff. Is that kind of one of the concerns as well from a security and